Cole Brennan had been hunting men for 12 years, ever since the war ended and left him with a skill set that only worked on the wrong side of peace. He was good at it, too good. He could track a man across 3 territories, read signs in the dust that others would miss, and when the moment came, his hand never shook. The bounty posters piled up, the money came in, and Cole told himself he was just doing a job, bringing justice to lawless places, making the frontier a little safer for decent folk. But the truth that lived in his chest, the one he tried to drown in whiskey and distance, was darker than that. He wasn't bringing justice, he was bringing death. And after a while, the faces of the men he'd killed started following him into his sleep. Thomas Garrett was just another name on a poster, wanted for robbery and murder in Colorado, $500 dead or alive. The description was basic: brown hair, medium build, scar above his left eyebrow, dangerous and armed. Cole tracked him for 3 weeks through the Montana wilderness, following the trail of stolen horses and abandoned campsites, until he finally caught up with him at a creek just outside Helena. Thomas saw Cole coming and went for his gun. Cole was faster. He always was. The bullet caught Thomas in the chest, and he went down in the shallow water, blood spreading like ink in the current. Cole checked the body, confirmed the scar, took the identification papers from Thomas's coat pocket. Just another job finished. Just another ghost to add to the collection. But something happened that Cole hadn't expected. When he went through Thomas's belongings, looking for anything valuable to supplement the bounty, he found letters. Dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon, all addressed to Thomas from his wife, Sarah Garrett. Every letter spoke of love, of missing him, of waiting for him to come home to their small ranch outside Bozeman. The last letter, dated just 2 weeks before, mentioned she was expecting their first child. Cole stood in that creek with a dead man at his feet and a widow's letters in his hands, and for the first time in 12 years, the weight of what he did felt too heavy to carry. But he buried that feeling the way he always did, delivered the body, collected his money, and rode away telling himself that Thomas Garrett had made his choices and paid the price, that it wasn't Cole's job to feel guilty about bringing in a wanted man, that the law was the law, and he was just the instrument of it. But 3 months later, when the nightmares got too loud and the whiskey stopped working, Cole found himself riding toward Bozeman. He told himself he just wanted to see if the widow was all right, make sure she had help with the ranch, maybe leave some anonymous money to ease his conscience. He never planned to speak to her, never planned to let her see his face. But the moment he saw Sarah Garrett standing in her garden, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, her face turned up to the sun with an expression of such profound loneliness that it stopped his heart, Cole knew he was doomed, because she was beautiful in the way that broken things are beautiful. Strong despite the weight of her grief, surviving despite everything that should have crushed her. He introduced himself as a drifter looking for work, said his name was Cole Brennan, which was true, and that he knew horses, which was also true. He didn't mention that he'd killed her husband, didn't mention the blood that still stained his conscience. He just offered his labor for exchange for food and a place to sleep. And Sarah, who desperately needed help running the ranch alone, agreed. Cole told himself he'd stay a week, help her fix the fences, repair the barn, make sure she was settled before winter came. Then he'd disappear and never come back. But a week became 2, 2 became a month.
And somewhere in the space between fixing her broken porch and teaching her how to handle the wild mare that Thomas had never gotten around to breaking, Cole fell in love with the woman whose husband he'd killed.
Sarah started to heal in those weeks, started to smile again. The baby grew inside her, and Cole found himself placing his hand on her belly to feel the kicks, his heart breaking and mending at the same time. She told him about Thomas, how they'd met, how he'd promised to give up his wild ways and build a life with her, how she'd believed in him even when everyone said he was trouble. She cried in Cole's arms when the nights got too quiet, and Cole held her, drowning in guilt and love in equal measure. When the baby came on a cold November night, Cole was the one who held Sarah's hand through the pain, who wrapped the tiny girl in clean blankets and placed her in her mother's arms, who watched Sarah look down at her daughter with such fierce love that Cole thought his chest would crack open from the weight of what he'd done. Sarah named the baby Grace and asked Cole to stay, not as hired help, but as something more, something real. She told him she'd been alone long enough, that life was too short and too hard to face it without someone who cared. She told him she was falling in love with him, and could he possibly feel the same way? Cole should have left right then, should have ridden away before the lie got any deeper. But he was weak and selfish, and so desperately in love with this woman and this child that he convinced himself maybe he could have this. Maybe he could build something good on top of something terrible. Maybe redemption was possible if he loved them enough, protected them enough, became the man they needed him to be. So he stayed. They married in the spring, a quiet ceremony with just the local pastor and a handful of neighbors. Cole promised to love and cherish Sarah, to raise Grace as his own, to be the husband and father they deserved. And every word of those vows tasted like ashes in his mouth because he knew they were built on a grave. 6 months passed like a dream. Cole worked the ranch till his hands bled, determined to give Sarah and Grace everything Thomas never could. He was good to them, gentle, devoted. Sarah bloomed under his care, her laughter returning, her eyes bright with happiness for the first time since Thomas died. Grace grew strong, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Cole's thumb, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. But guilt is patient. It waits in the shadows, growing stronger, until the weight of it becomes too heavy to hide. Cole started having nightmares, not about all the men he'd killed, but about Thomas Garrett dying in that creek, blood in the water, while somewhere miles away Sarah laughed at something Cole said. He'd wake up in the middle of the night soaked in sweat, Sarah sleeping peacefully beside him, and the truth would choke him. He was living the life of a dead man, loving a woman who only loved him because her real husband was gone, playing father to a child whose real father he'd murdered for $500. The breaking point came on a cold afternoon when Sarah was cleaning out an old trunk and found one of Thomas's belongings that the marshal had returned after the body was identified. A leather journal, worn and stained. She opened it with trembling hands, tears already forming, and began reading her dead husband's last entries. Thomas had written about trying to go straight, about leaving his old gang and heading to Montana to start over with Sarah, about the mistakes he'd made and the man he was trying to become. The last entry was dated the day he died. He wrote that he knew bounty hunters were after him, that he'd left his gang, but they'd still pinned old crimes on him to save themselves. He wrote that if anything happened to him, Sarah should know he loved her more than life itself, that he was innocent of the murder they'd blamed him for, that he was coming home to her just as soon as he could shake the hunters off his trail. Sarah read it aloud, her voice breaking, and Cole felt his world disintegrating, because suddenly he understood what he'd done. Thomas Garrett hadn't been reaching for a gun that day at the creek. He'd been reaching for his identification papers to prove who he was, to prove he was innocent. And Cole had been too fast, too certain, too convinced that wanted posters never lied. He'd killed an innocent man and then married his widow. Sarah noticed Cole's expression, the color draining from his face, the way his hands had started shaking. She asked him what was wrong, and Cole couldn't hold it anymore. The truth came pouring out like poison from a wound. He told her everything: the bounty, the creek, the $500, the letters, the months of deception, the love that grew from blood and lies. And that's how they ended up here, with that photograph on the floor between them and Sarah looking at Cole like he was a stranger.
Sarah stood in the lamplight, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clutching her chest like she was trying to hold her heart inside her body. She didn't scream, didn't hit him, didn't grab the rifle hanging over the fireplace and make him pay for what he'd done. She just stood there, shaken, tears streaming down her face, trying to reconcile the man she loved with the man who'd destroyed her life. Cole fell to his knees, not dramatically, but like a man whose legs simply couldn't hold the weight anymore. He told her he was sorry, but the words felt hollow, useless, like trying to bail out the ocean with a cup. He told her he'd leave, disappear. She'd never have to see him again. He'd send money for her and Grace. He'd do anything, give anything, be anything if it could somehow undo what he'd done. But Sarah wasn't listening to his apologies. She was staring at the photograph of Thomas, and at baby Grace sleeping in the cradle by the fire, and at Cole kneeling broken on the floor. 3 people caught in a tragedy that had no clean ending, no simple resolution, no way forward that didn't leave someone bleeding. She told Cole to get out. Her voice was steady, cold, like winter wind across bare ground. She said she needed time to think, to feel, to figure out who she was now that everything she thought she knew had turned to dust. She said she couldn't look at him without seeing Thomas dying, couldn't think about their marriage without tasting the lie underneath every kiss. She said maybe someday she could forgive him, but that day wasn't today, and it might never come. Cole stood, his whole body shaking, and walked toward the door. But before he left, Sarah said one more thing. Said Grace deserved to know the truth when she was old enough to understand it. Said Cole owed Thomas Garrett that much, to let his daughter know her real father had been a good man who'd tried to come home, who'd died not for his crimes, but for crimes that were never his to begin with. Cole nodded, unable to speak, and walked out into the cold Montana night. He rode away from the ranch, from the woman he loved, from the life he'd built on borrowed time and stolen happiness. But he didn't ride far, just to the edge of town, where he found a small room above the saloon and waited. Days turned into weeks. Cole worked odd jobs, sent money to Sarah anonymously, and watched from a distance as she struggled to keep the ranch running alone with a baby to care for. His heart screamed at him to go help her, but he knew his presence would only make things worse. He'd given her what she asked for: space, time,
absence. Then one afternoon, 3 months after that terrible night, Cole was leaving the general store when he saw them. 3 men, hard-looking, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much blood. They were asking the shopkeeper about Sarah Garrett's ranch, asking if she was alone, asking if she had any money worth taking. Cole's blood went cold. He recognized them from wanted posters, the remains of the gang that Thomas Garrett had tried to leave, the same gang that had framed Thomas for murder to cover their own crimes. They'd heard Thomas was dead, heard his widow was managing a ranch alone, and smelled easy prey. Cole didn't think, didn't weigh his options. He just moved, followed them out of town, staying far enough back to avoid detection, watched as they approached Sarah's ranch as the sun was setting, saw them split up, surrounding the house, planning to take whatever they wanted, money, supplies, or worse. Cole could have ridden into town and gotten the marshal, could have let the law handle it the proper way, but there wasn't time, and more than that, this was his responsibility, his chance to do one thing right in a situation he'd made so terribly wrong. He hit the first one from behind as he was climbing through a window, knocked him cold without a sound. The second heard the commotion and came running, gun drawn. Cole was faster. The shot echoed across the valley, and Sarah came to the door with her own rifle raised, Grace crying inside the house. The third man grabbed Sarah, used her as a shield, his gun pressed to her head. He told Cole to drop his weapon or the widow died, and Cole, looking into Sarah's terrified eyes, saw his choice laid out clear as day. He could save himself and lose her, or risk everything for a woman who might never forgive him but deserved to live anyway. He dropped his gun, started talking to the outlaw, calm and steady, trying to negotiate, but while he talked, Sarah was moving. The strong woman who'd survived her husband's death and built a life from nothing wasn't about to be a victim again. She drove her elbow back hard, broke the man's grip for just a second. It was all Cole needed. He lunged forward, wrestled the gun away, and in the struggle, it was the outlaw who ended up in the dust, not Sarah.
When the marshal arrived an hour later, drawn by the gunshots, he found Cole standing guard over 3 bound men, while Sarah sat on her porch, Grace in her arms, staring at the man who'd saved her life after destroying it. The marshal recognized the outlaws, said they'd been wanted for years, said the reward money would set Sarah up comfortably for a long time, said Cole was a hero. But Cole wasn't looking for praise. He was looking at Sarah, waiting for her judgment, waiting to see if saving her life could ever balance against taking her husband's. Sarah didn't speak at first, just looked at Cole for a long moment, her eyes full of too many emotions to name. Then she asked him a question, asked him if he'd done it for redemption or because he still loved her. Cole told her the truth, said he'd probably never be redeemed for what he'd done, said killing Thomas Garrett would haunt him until his last breath, and he deserved that haunting. But he'd saved her tonight because love doesn't stop just because it's inconvenient or unwanted or built on the worst kind of foundation. He loved her and Grace more than his own life, and he always would, whether she sent him away or not. Sarah nodded slowly, said she couldn't promise she'd ever fully forgive him, said trust, once shattered, takes years to rebuild, and even then it never looks quite the same. But she said she'd seen who he really was tonight, not the bounty hunter who'd made a terrible mistake, but the man who'd spent 6 months proving he could be better, who'd loved her child like his own, who just risked his life without hesitation because it was the right thing to do. She said maybe they couldn't go back, couldn't reclaim what they had before the truth came out. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new, something honest, something forged not from lies, but from the hard work of facing the truth and choosing to move forward anyway. Cole said he didn't deserve that chance. Sarah agreed, said it wasn't about deserving. It was about Grace deserving a father who'd protect her, about Sarah deserving a partner who'd be there when the wolves came to the door, about both of them deserving a chance to heal, even if the scars never fully faded. The lesson they learned together, there in the fading light with the valley stretched out before them, was this: some sins can't be forgiven, can't be erased, can't be balanced by any amount of good deeds. But people aren't just the worst thing they've ever done. They're also every choice they make after that. Every day they choose to be better. Every moment they love despite having every reason to hate. Cole never stopped carrying the guilt of what he'd done to Thomas Garrett. He and Sarah hung Thomas's photograph in their home, and when Grace was old enough, they told her the truth about her father, that he'd been innocent, that he loved her, that he died trying to come home to her. They told her about Cole's part in it too. All of it. Every hard, ugly truth. Grace grew up knowing that her family was built on tragedy and redemption in equal measure, that love sometimes grows in the hardest soil, that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, but about refusing to let the past poison the future. Cole and Sarah never had an easy love. They had a real one, the kind that's tested by truth and tempered by time, the kind that acknowledges the blood spilled and still chooses to plant seeds anyway. And maybe that's the only kind of love that lasts, the kind that sees all the broken pieces and says, I'll stay anyway. If this tale touched your heart, then don't ride off just yet. There are more stories waiting beneath the western sun, tales of love, betrayal, and lessons learned the hard way. Subscribe to Frontier Love Tales, where every story reminds us that love still rides, even across the roughest frontier. Because sometimes the greatest courage isn't in being perfect, but in facing your mistakes and building something beautiful from the ruins.